I'm Toni Esselin.
And I'm Aimee Bernard.
And we are here to help make it make sense.
This is the podcast that takes complicated science and breaks it down into easy to understand language.
So buckle up, buttercups. You are in for a bumpy ride. All right, everyone. Welcome to Help Make It Make Sense. We are so excited, super excited, honored, privileged to have our first guest. Oh my God, I'm fangirling here. Our first guest, and Dr. Aimee, what kind of caliber guest do we have?
We have the highest level caliber guest that you can get.
I mean, it just doesn't get higher than this, honestly. We are so excited to have Dr. Stella Safo, who is a board-certified HIV primary care physician, public health advocate, and the founder of Just Equity for Health, a healthcare improvement company that uses advocacy, education, and care model design to ensure equitable care delivery across all sectors of medicine. Mm-hmm. She is the founding member of several organizations dedicated to gender and racial equity and to civic engagement in medicine. In 2020, Dr. Safo was named one of modern healthcare's top minority clinicians, top, y'all, to watch, and she is a current New York Academy of Medicine Fellow. In addition to all these things, right, in equity, all these things in consulting and in equity projects, and her unwavering dedication to social justice work, Dr. Safo also provides in her spare time clinical care to patients in New York. Her work has been featured in various academic and popular media, including CNN and MSNBC, and now the world-renowned podcast, Help Make It Make Sense with Dr. Toni and Dr. Aimee. Dr. Stella Safo, welcome. We are so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is amazing.
This is great. All right, so we're going to kick it off with, first of all, how are you feeling about these mask guidelines in New York City that just came out by the commission?
Listen, man, I can't take enough sighs. I am so tired that I feel like I've lived 6 or 7 lifetimes, like in the last 3 years alone. For anyone out there who's just so exhausted with all the COVID back and forth and you feel like you have whiplash, I want to say that I hear you, I feel you. This is really tough. And we have a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that's still raging. And so when I heard that the city was going to bring back guidance, and now it's an advisory, it's not a mandate, it's an advisory that for indoors and public transportation, you want to wear a mask because of what's going on with COVID, the flu, RSV. When I heard that, I felt a real sense of relief because I think that there are people who are not going to wear masks if Jesus himself came down and said, wear a mask. And then there are people who are like, look, I'd wear a mask, but like, I don't know, should we wear it? Should we not wear it? So I feel like this advisory says to people who are kind of middle of the line, yeah, you should probably wear it. And I think a lot of people will, and I think it will help.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so excited. I was like, oh, thank God. Cause I've been like the only mask warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Aimee and I were always talking about, we're not going down in the gas station getting gas. Right? Like we want to like make sure that we're protected, that we're not bringing stuff home, all of those things. And we're, the most important thing that I think that you've said is that this pandemic is not over, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're still in the thick of it. So
yeah, I just flew from Denver to Atlanta to St. Lucia and back around Thanksgiving. And I swear to you that my family, my 2 kids and my husband and I were some of the only people wearing masks on the airplanes and in the airports. And yeah, there's a lot going around,
There is. And like, I don't know about you guys, but I've never really had like mask embarrassment. Like I've just never experienced that. Like if I'm wearing a mask, I'm just like, I'm wearing this mask. What? But then recently I stopped going to the gym because I was pregnant and then I had my baby and I didn't want to expose her. So I stopped my gym membership and I recently started it again because this holiday weight will get you. And so I like went back to the gym for the first time this last weekend and I was the only person masked. And it was the first time that I had a little bit of like I'm the odd duckling out. So I want to acknowledge for people who are masking and in spaces like what you've just described, Dr. Aimee, of like, you're one of the only people masked. It does feel a little weird. Mm-hmm. But then I think about the patients that I see who come in with symptoms of long COVID. And I
Yeah.
think about bringing illness home to my kid who isn't even a year, whose immune system is still developing, and who, if I can avoid illness for, I'm going to. And that honestly just keeps me wearing it and it keeps me going. So I don't think it's fair though to just act like wearing a mask is like so easy and like whatever. Like it gets to a point where you're the only one in a room of 50, 100 people where you're like, am I the odd one out?
Right.
But I have to say, like, I really think that it is worth it. And I have to remind myself, and I love being among folks like y'all, because it's like, this is a reminder of why we do it. We do it because we want to protect each other.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say I felt like I was getting some weird looks too, which I thought was unusual because, you know, I'm protecting myself, but also if I were to have anything, I'm also protecting other people. So, but I did feel like some people were looking at me like, that weirdo is wearing a mask. Like, we're done with masks. Doesn't everybody know COVID's over?
Right. Right.
Understand.
Look at the weirdo.
Yeah.
But I, you know what? I wore it. I wore it proud. I was like, yep, that's right. And I'm vaccinated.
Good for you. Good for you.
That's right.
So we have a couple more questions, as you might imagine. How would you recommend that we get as a community through this like COVID fatigue, particularly around vaccines and how so I don't know if you've listened to this world-renowned podcast, but Dr. Toni and I are pushing back on the word booster. We think people think booster and that means last dose I will ever need. So we've been trying to push back and use the term additional dose because we feel like there will be additional doses probably far into the future for these COVID vaccines.
Yep.
So how do you recommend we get through this kind of fatigue of, well, I've already had my COVID shots and, you know, why do I need more? Like, what's the deal with boosters / additional doses?
I'm actually feeling strangely hopeful about this. And let me tell you why.
Okay.
Because when COVID first hit the scene, it stopped everything, as you guys, we all lived it, right? Like it was the only thing you thought about in New York City. And Toni, you know this, we would hear the sirens. I live in Crown Heights. You would hear the sirens all day carrying people to the hospital. You would see the trucks. Like it just took your whole kind of capacity. And I think that that's what people are tired of. I think people are tired of feeling as though the number 1, 2, and 3 thing they need to worry about or think about is COVID-19. I think that we are moving to a point where there is a backlash and there is this feeling of like, I'm going to ignore COVID like it doesn't exist. And yet people keep getting sick. And so I think we're going to get to a point, you know, maybe in a year or 2 years where people are like, look, COVID is a thing. It keeps happening. I keep getting sick. I'm going to approach it the way that I approach other illnesses that, you know, when they get like, who hasn't had the flu and wished that they had done whatever they could to not get the flu again, right? Like, I think COVID is going to go down that route at some point where people are going to treat it with the kind of importance that it needs, because what we're all describing now is feeling as though people are actively ignoring it. They don't want to get tested. They don't want to get, you know, like, I think that that's going to change a little where people are going to say, I've been vaccinated. I like to not get COVID. And so I'm going to take the additional dose. And if I'm, you know, pretty sick or there's a lot of illness in the school or my work, you know, where I'm at, I might wear a mask. I think that the resistance that we're feeling now will actually quiet slightly as we get to a place where COVID doesn't have us like by the chokehold that it's had us by in the last few years. It might be wishful thinking, but the reason why I say this is because I think we humans are good at adapting. And I think that the adaptation that we're making, this kind of extreme irrelevance to COVID, is in response to feeling as though it's captured our whole attention. And that's going to kind of right itself going forward.
I like the positivity. I like that. I like to put a positive spin on almost everything, as Dr. Toni can attest to. So I'm going to embrace this. I love it. Thank you. That makes me feel better.
Well, I need to say it to myself sometimes too, because these times are rough, you know?
Yeah.
They are. And I think to piggyback on everything that you just said, I think one of the things that I think a lot about in terms of the resistance that we're feeling and the situation that we're in is a lot of it is because there's no trust in the communities, right? Like the communities just don't trust anything that we have to say, right? We could be blue in the face. And so what does the road in your opinion, and in all the work that you've done to rebuilding that trust or starting that foundational block? Because it's going to take eons, right? It didn't, this trust didn't happen overnight. And it has been built upon over centuries. So how do we get back to, what's the first step? What do we need to like put all our energy and our resources in to start rebuilding that trust back to our communities?
I think that rebuilding is going to come a lot from our direct interactions. And that's really hard because direct interactions are hard to scale. But let me just kind of describe to you. So one thing that I have found, and I work in HIV medicine, and so I think about this with HIV is, back in the day with HIV, there were a lot of myths. People were really confused. Can I get it if someone coughs, on me or touches the same towel? And it took the kind of sitting with a clinician, letting them tell you what was really going on, or having someone who had HIV that you knew, or having someone in your community who knew this stuff talk to you and help you to kind of really understand. Yes, there was some public health campaigns that did help as well, but it was really the kind of acclimation and kind of one-on-oneness that I think helped people to really frame HIV in the way that was, more appropriate and helped with some of the destigmatizing that we saw down the line. We have lost so much in terms of the framing of COVID-19. People believe that the vaccines are pushed by pharma. People believe, just the misinformation that's been going on. And I think that what will really, really help is, again, returning to kind of those first principles of the conversations that you're having with people that you respect to be able to really debunk some of the things that you're hearing. And for the people who are being talked to and being asked these questions, we then have to come with humility and honesty. So one thing that I've been doing a lot of is admitting that our framing of the vaccines when they first came out were not what we ended up seeing. So we really thought, like with these 2 vaccines and 3 boosters, like we could be in a position where we could really at least not have the community spread quite as much as we saw it. And so when people would say to me, well, why is it that, even if I'm vaccinated, all the vaccinated folks are still getting COVID? I will start and I will say, we didn't expect that. We didn't expect that if folks were vaccinated, that our populations, that it would spread quite this much. And yet it did, because of the fact that not everyone got vaccinated and there's mutations. And just that small acknowledgement, I think, lets people feel like they are seen and lets them feel as though like their questions that they've had aren't just meant to be disregarded, right? Like, I don't need to go through all the science of how, like, actually there were pockets of people who were saying from the beginning that these vaccines might not work in the coverage that, but I start from this place of like, let's just acknowledge that something wasn't as we kind of all said in the beginning. Because our message, I don't know if you guys remember, with the vaccines, it was like, this is the savior. Let's go 100% vaccine mandates. And that hasn't panned out that way. And so I think that there is the one-on-oneness, there's the interpersonal conversations. And then for those of us in public health, those of us who are scientists, those of us who are clinicians, it's acknowledging where we weren't exactly right, because that then builds more trust for people to say, you know what, they didn't get it right, but like the fact that they can admit that, I believe her, I believe them. Let's keep talking. What else do you have to tell me? That is a huge process in repairing the trust that I think we've lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that along those lines is that you not only have the like breakdown of the trust in the communities based on all of those things that you just mentioned, but then also we are tired. Like my colleagues are exhausted. Like they're just exhausted. And so if the bridge to the community is personal conversations and the folks that you're meeting and really digging into that resource, how do we help our colleagues rally? Because they're exhausted. They're tired of having, and in the context of, and these are the conversations I'm having now, is kind of like in the context of like, we struggle with flu. We've struggled with flu. We can't get our populations vaccinated against the flu every year. And now we're going to add this. So how do we shake up the apathy, right? In our own colleagues, to get them passionate about this, to get them re-stimulated about this, to help their burnout about this, because clinicians also have families have been touched by COVID, right? And they've also experienced their own loss and the whole up and down of being a hero and now you suck, like it's just
that whiplash.
I mean, that whole thing is just, and then we're going to turn around and just be like, all right, providers, put on your boots and get out there and advocate for the communities whose trust you have degraded, that they didn't necessarily feel like was their message, right? So what do we do? What do we do here?
I feel that on so many levels. I also really subscribe to this very, very strongly as a Black woman. I don't think that it is ever shameful or an issue to take the rest that you need. Like the fact that people are depressed and people are burned out and people are tired, that is a signal often from your body or your psyche, your very cells, that you have to find some way to rest. And so I never push people to be a voice and to advocate and to do more when that sentiment is there of rest. It may be that for a few years that there are people who, look like us, who should be the ones kind of out there spreading the message, who are taking the rest that they need. And what is scary in that time, and I have another solution that I'd love to talk to you guys about, is that it's really misinformation and disinformation that is filling that space, right? And to me, the solution, in addition to the one-on-one conversations, is that we do need policies, we do need platforms, we do need spaces where that disinformation and misinformation is targeted. And that needs to come from the policymakers, which is why a lot of the work that I do is also around civic engagement and policy, because it has such an impact, right? Like there's no way that me as Stella, a clinician, is going to be able to out loud the platforms of misinformation on Facebook and social media, etc. We have to really be serious about our government officials thinking about how they offer these spaces that target that and address that. But as it relates to our people being tired, I think we have to take the rest. That said, we also need to acknowledge that there's so many new folks coming up that are invigorated. Like our resident trainees might be tired, but let me tell you, some of these medical students are ready to go. They are ready to go, and they've been ready to go. And so there's this kind of space of like, maybe we give some of us rest while we figure out what platforms we're using to really raise other voices, right? Where are the young people voices of people who are training and learning about these things and going into their communities and talking about these things? Like maybe we formalize that, maybe we put money into that, like there's all these interesting, and they're often from the global South, of these interesting collectives of kind of civil servants that do public health work. And they go into communities and they talk about the need for, vaccinations or the need for safe birthing, etc. Maybe we bring some of those models into the US and it's like a grassroots effort of like, let's really address this person by person. And, I want to emphasize your point, though. It doesn't have to be the very same talking heads that you see doing all the work who are tired, as they should be. Maybe it's other people. Let's think about what those other people look like as they come into this space.
I love that. I love that. And I think we have to kind of figure out a way to take that first, like, what's the first step? Like, where do we go? Where do we pilot it? Where does it start? Right.
Mm-hmm.
What are the ways in which that we can actually actualize this model of like, all right, you have every right to be exhausted. Mm-hmm. You have every right to be tired. Right? Like take the breath, take the moment, take this pause that you need to pause it. If you're not able to function at the top of wherever it is that you felt that you needed to function, right? Like take that moment and like, let's think outside the box of who can replace that, right? Mm-hmm. Who can replace that conversation. It doesn't mm-hmm. always have to be, the board certified MD, et cetera, or, the nurse practitioner's been out there for 20 years, slogging away. It doesn't always have to be the same people. Like, who are the folks? How do we actually institutionalize the idea of other folks stepping into spaces where you don't need the board certification and you don't need this mm-hmm. and you don't need that. But that there's a passion and a loving and an understanding of what needs to get done for the community and getting out of the way so mm-hmm. that we can give them the space to do that.
I love that too. And Dr. Safo, I teach immunology at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. I teach immunology to the first and third year medical students, and they are the students that have been coming in this year, last year, they're coming in knowing what they're getting into. Like these people are, like you said, they're ready to go. They're not stepping into medicine right now because it's like the easy thing to do, and it never was. But now there are even more challenges than there were before, and they're still choosing to come to med school. So I agree with you. And I work with these students. I teach them about immunology. I teach them about vaccines. And some of these students are just so excited. They want to do so many different things. They're very involved in community service. We actually have a community service element to our curriculum. And so many of the students will ask me about vaccine advocacy because I've been doing it for over 15 years as part of something called Immunize Colorado. I'm also part of the Colorado Vaccine Equity Task Force and also the Colorado Immunization Advocate. So I'm part of 3 different nonprofits, but the students are like, how do I get involved? Like, how can I become part of that? And when I talk about vaccine advocacy, which I do, by the way, at like every possible moment, even if it's tangential, I'm just like, oh, and students like want to know how to do it. Like they just want to get invested. So I agree with you. I think that we need to tap into those students or residents or fellows, whoever it is that is kind of more fresh, not as tired, but maybe not as exhausted as some others.
Down by the system, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I agree with you, and I would love to, not right now, but talk to you about ways to do that, because I think that there's just so many opportunities to do that we could tap into and use that energy and excitement to advocate for pro science and vaccines. So thank you. That was awesome.
And let's do it. Let's absolutely do it.
Let's do that. I think that also one of the things that, I don't know if you've gone through this yourself, but one of the things that I reflect on is my education and how I was educated, and the amount of learning I had to do outside of my formalized education, and how I was like, yeah, that shouldn't have been outside. That should have been a part of my curriculum. Like, why am I just, because they're so focused on like passing exams and getting through and looking reputable and all of this stuff. And it's not about, the actual practice of like, what is a conversation with a parent, with a patient, with a human being that has suffered? How do you talk to these people, right? Not just an elective.
Completely agree. So, along those lines, Dr. Toni, next week in my advanced immunology, we have a 4-hour vaccine communication strategy workshop that all third-year medical students have to go through. And I have 3 other vaccine advocates, all physicians, that we all go to legislature and we testify for pro-vaccine, pro-science. And we're going to have them go through role plays. They're gonna write down the misconceptions and myths that they've heard. We're gonna give them talking points and like, what's the science behind it. So that kind of thing. I agree with you completely. And as a co-course director for the 3rd-year immunology course in the med school, they were like, is that really an advanced topic? And I'm like, well, doesn't matter. I'm a course director, and guess what? I consider it essential. So guess what?
That's right.
So can I also just say, though, I think one thing that you mentioned there, you kind of put that in, Dr. Aimee, about like testifying in front of, our elected officials. I would argue, to your point, Dr. Toni, that that's actually another essential skill of how do we take what we know, being witnesses on the front lines of seeing the impact of botched abortions, the impact of poor gun laws, the impact of unclean water and climate change, take all of that and package it and turn it to a place where we can then impact policymakers, right? And COVID was a great example of that. We saw what happened when you had, poor policies that were making people sick. And yet many of us didn't have the language to say, wait, who is my elected official? How do I go testify? How do I testify on a school board to make sure that my kids are encouraged to wear masks? We didn't know. A lot of us as clinicians just didn't know how to do that. And we were really caught back-footed. And I would argue that a core part of our education needs to be an understanding of how to show up and be civically engaged, whether it's in helping to get folks out to the polls to vote for people who are going to keep them safe, or if it's in, speaking in front of elected officials, whatever it is. Those are the things that we actually need as part of our ability to, to do things like vaccine advocacy and to do things like to keep our population safe, because we get tired when we have to do everything in addition to our jobs. Wouldn't it be nice if we could advocate and say, oh, wow, there's a worldwide pandemic. Can we make it so that advanced, practitioners take over some of my clinic, and I'm going to have protected time to do this advocacy, right? That's how we avoid burnout. Part of what's happened is that people like all of us have just done everything for the last 3 years,
Right.
and we are tired. And we wouldn't be so tired if we were able to impact the systems that impact our lives. And one of the ways to do that is for us in healthcare to really embrace, kind of constructed community activism and advocacy instead of running away from it, which is what we do, And so I wish I could be like a course director, Dr. Aimee, and be like, we're going to learn this thing and really help people to show up in a way that's going to ultimately protect themselves, their patients, and their communities much better down the line.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the thing. And I think that what happens is that we end up doing it all because a lot of the times, sometimes we feel like our best interests are not being represented. And so we need to figure that out. We need to figure out a better way to be able to train folks in the issues that require, like, yes, healthcare knowledge is absolutely a part of it. And it is not completely divorced from policy and practice and civil engagement. It's not. And I think I don't know how you feel, Dr. Safo, but I feel like when I trained, I was like, oh, I don't politics? Nuh-uh.
Exactly.
Nope.
Exactly.
I'm trying to understand how the blood pumps oxygen across these ATP pumps. Okay. Like that's what I'm trying to understand. Right. So it was like, it wasn't until just working and living in these spaces that you're just like, it's actually a part of it. And I don't think we hear that enough. I have to give a shout out to Joya Mukherjee, who I have to give her a shout out because I did a global health deliveries course in Boston.
I did the same one
when I was a resident. And there was one thing she said that broke my heart and also activated me at the same time, because I was one of those people who was just politics. Nope. I'm going to do medicine. I'm taking care of human beings who are sick. And she said, unprompted, it wasn't because I made a comment or anything. It was just part of her. It was part of her, her Joya thing, right? Where she gets going. And she just was like, if you think that medicine or public health is not political, you're in the wrong field. I'll never forget her saying that. I will never, ever forget her saying that. Because when she said that, I had been in this space of like, I don't want to understand politics.
That's powerful.
It's too confusing and it's too upsetting, right? So like, I can't. And she said, and I remember just
that touched your soul.
Ruminating over that, because it was like, oh my God, this woman who I admire, MedPeds, by the way, MedPeds doc, was like, this passion for Haitian people who I also, that's my thing. And all the work that she's done in the global health space. And she said, if you are involved in public health or medicine and you don't think it's political, you're in the wrong field. I was like,
she's right.
Woo! I was like, woo, you just testified there. So anyhow, I think that that's really important. And I think that like a lot of what we've said here brings me back to how Dr. Aimee and I got started. And that was with the misinformation, right? That's how we got, that's how this whole podcast got started. That's how our friendship reignited, was because of misinformation, right? And I'm deep in it because I have a lot of anti-vaxxers in my family.
Really?
I have a lot of, oh yes. And I have a lot of people who don't trust. And it comes from a lack of trust, right? It's coming from a understanding of some of the history in terms of how Black people have been, experimented on, and how there hasn't been a lot of truth and the government can't be trusted and all of this stuff. So this whole thing launched because I started with a conversation with my family, with myself, where I was like, how do I tell my family members with a straight face to get vaccinated? How do I do that when they don't trust anything that's going on? And that's how I've been building my my conversations, my discussions, right, around that understanding of like, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Things have not been well done in medicine. 100%. You are absolutely right. And that's one of the things that Dr. Aimee and I talk about when we're here, is like, listen, we get it. We have not earned your trust. We get it. And we care. We care a lot. And so listen to what it is that we're saying and come back to us with the rebuttals so that we can give you context, because we studied this for years, for years. And I think the part that I struggle with the misinformation piece is the fact that, like, how do you help somebody understand that you are not reiterating bad things back to them, and that you're not part of the system, and that you're not, you're just indoctrinated, Dr. Toni, talking about, you don't know what you're talking about. You're one of them. And it's like I can, on a one-to-one, be like, all right, let's like gain somebody's trust. I can do it, but it takes a long time, and it takes really centering the concerns of that other person.
Yep.
And then trying to like let them see why what it is that you're saying is actually making sense, even if it's not necessarily what their comfort level is, right? And so I don't know, how do I talk to somebody who's just like just briefly, right? Like there was that conversation, Dr. Aimee, we had, that I told you about, the cab driver that I and this cab driver was like, listen, Nietzsche and Stalin, and I don't know what he was saying. I was like,
Nietzsche.
oh, wow, I don't know what, just a whole bunch of stuff. And that like mandates are down the path of dictatorship, and it's our freedoms and our liberties. And I was like, oh my God. Like, and he believed it. And I think I got to a place in that conversation where I wanted him to say out loud, I said, okay, so the threat of tyranny, the threat, not what's actually happening, but the threat of tyranny is scarier to you
than losing
than
your life.
people that you've lost in your life from COVID. And he said, yes. And yes. And so it's kind of like that understanding that, like, how do we talk to, and I won't tire, like I'll continue to talk to these folks, like I'll continue to talk to somebody who's afraid of, because I truly want to understand.
Captain America, I can do this all day.
I mean, I really want to understand. I'm really curious, right? I really want to understand why the threat of tyranny makes you more concerned than the fact that you lost your cousin. Like, I want to understand that. But how do you get to the part of the misinformation piece is that it's getting spun as, oh, well, you're part of the government can't be, and they're trying to kill us, and you're the stupid one. You're the one who's just spewing all of this stuff. Like, what do we do?
You've said so much. I want to just acknowledge how hard it is when you have people that you love who are unable to be reached or hard to reach. That's something that I feel really deeply, because all of what you're describing comes from a place of love, right? Because we love our communities, because we love each other, we want to see each other be healthy, and we want to see each other thrive. If we didn't, we would probably just go collect your paycheck, just mind your business, say nothing. If someone says COVID isn't real, whatever, we'd be like, okay, do you, And it's because of this love that we speak out, and we try to educate, and we try to, and I return to that, because I think that when you remind yourself that you're doing this, not so you could be right, but from a place of love, to me, I think people often sense that, and they often feel that. They often can tell, to your point, Toni, when you spend time with people over time, oh, wow, like this person comes back to this. And what I hear from them is concern from love. It's like when you're with your siblings, and like, I have 3 brothers, and they will just be on me about like, did you do this? Did you do that? And I'm like, why are you just harassing me? But I hear what it is that's their love language, right? Like, they want to make sure that I'm okay. So if we come at each other from a place of love, and we say that we want to offer information, and people are hearing when we say things like get vaccinated, etc., they're hearing us as agents of pharma or the government or whatever, there is a disconnect and a challenge there. And I would say sometimes you're successful, they hear that love and goodwill, and they may, believe you or consider it, or, Other times you're not successful. What I think is going to be tremendously interesting, and I'd just love to hear what both of you guys think about this, is that if projections are correct, COVID will change the way that we as a population experience chronic illness. And it will absolutely impact certain long-term chronic illnesses. What is interesting is that there is a potential that it just gets framed as, oh, people have more chronic fatigue syndrome. That's because people don't eat well. Oh, children have more diabetes. That's because of the worsening obesity epidemic. You know, we can, if we don't want to see it, we don't have to see it, right? But I actually do believe, or I want to believe, Dr. Aimee, to the point of like, you know, optimism. I want to believe that if in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, the research kind of pans out and lets us see how much COVID has impacted us, that many people won't just kind of naturally go to, you know, conspiracy theories, but will say, wow. And that it's in that time, it may not be right now, but it's in that time that I think we start to reinvest the trust, because people will remember, oh, wow, I had that cab ride with that crazy lady who told me that, you know, whatever, like I had to get vaccinated. And I think what that does is it introduces an open space. And those open spaces can be really liminal down the line, because what it says is that it, even if you didn't at the time take it into your spirit, I think it creates this sense of like, wow, I wasn't right about that. What else am I not right about? And what other ways do I need to think about and engage with the health system? Or, you know, how it forces people to interrogate themselves. And so I guess what I'm saying to us is that this is a long game. And I'm curious to see, and I'd love your thoughts on this, just because I ask people all the time, what will happen in 20 years when we see the impact of COVID on our population? Like, how do you think people will then assess and look back even on this time and say like, wow, I wish I had known? Or what do you think people will do? Do you think people will just kind of say, oh, brush it under the rug, COVID wasn't real, whatever? Or do you think our population will say, oh, we wish we had really taken it more seriously?
I think that's a really tough one, because, you know, I see so much diversity in how people are thinking about it right now in real time, where I see people getting sick, people dying, people not taking, you know, not getting vaccinated, not wearing masks. And I know that people have to understand that people are dying from this disease, and it's still circulating, it's still out there. And there's some people that are still kind of digging their heels in, and, you know, personal liberty and freedom and whatever else. And I don't know. So it's hard for me to see, it's hard for me to think, and I really do want to be optimistic. It's hard for me to think that this will be a learning experience that people will reflect back on. I would love to think that way. One thing that I have learned, I think, in other areas outside of healthcare that we see just in politics in general, is that people right now are in denial of just history. People are in denial of history and the way things that have gone down and happened in the past across the globe. There are people that deny all kinds of situations that, you know, this is beyond this podcast, but I don't know that people reflect on this as a historical perspective, just because I don't see people reflecting on other bits of history that have clearly set us in paths that are better and worse, a lot of times worse. So I don't know. I would love to be optimistic, though. I would love to think that people will look back and say, oh, I'm glad that, you know, I wore the mask or I got vaccinated. I don't know. It's just, I wish I had a crystal ball.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, and I think what's important in what you said is the fact that another shout out, Dr. Kamara Jones, who says that we are ahistorical. She just says it. We're just ahistorical, and I think the solution is more in like, in general, how I think my head is less in how do we fix the acute problem now, and it's more in like, how do we repair the foundations? And I think that the foundation is, what can we do to start teaching generations that are coming now how not to be ahistorical. Like there's nothing you're going to be able to do about the 70-year-olds who are cranky and just like, you know, not optimistic. But what do we do? How do we change our educational pathways, our educational curriculums, everything? This is my thing about education and the way that we teach in general. And I'm talking about not even medical, I'm talking about like kindergarten, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about how do we teach ourselves to be students of history, not just to pass the social studies test, right? But to really learn from the mistakes that we've made so that we don't repeat history, right? Like this conversation, that ahistorical conversation is older than us in terms of folks that have been doing advocacy. And so how do we solidify it? I think, unfortunately, the way that we go, we rationalize things that have happened to us in order to deal and to stay in our comfort zones, right? So this in 20 years, it's going to be like, I got vaccinated, I wore my mask, and I still have chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Is what's going to happen, because we didn't have the perfect solve. COVID beat us, like it beat us up. I'm not, we have to say that. Like we can't sit there and pretend that we're on the mountain with our flags and we won. We did not win. We lost 1 million people in America. Like never mind across the globe, how many people have died, have lost their lives. And then the chronic stuff, that's going to be the next wave. And I think one of the things that upsets me about the chronic stuff as a clinician is the fact that we don't take care of chronic stuff well now.
Anyway.
Like now. And so the answer is not really how do we solve for COVID? It's really how do we solve for healthcare? And how do we solve for making sure that if you've got a neurological problem, that you're managed properly and that you're not on a waiting list for 6 months before you can see a neurologist? How do we manage the physical therapy that you need and that it's not going to get cut off after 12 visits if that's not enough, right? Like that is how we're going to get better at this. This is how we're going to get better at taking care of ourselves and for talking about what it is that we shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? Shoulda, coulda, woulda will be podcasts episodes ago where we were like, oh my God, everybody get vaccinated, like stay in your house. And if we do all 3 of those things for like 6 months, we'll be all right. And that didn't happen.
That did not.
That didn't happen. And so now the reality is we're in a situation where we're going to keep getting this gosh darn thing, no matter how vaccinated you are, but it'll be better. If you're vaccinated, it'll be better, right?
Absolutely.
People who are vaccinated and masked still are getting affected, right? This is going to be this is our reality, unfortunately, because we didn't do things right in the beginning.
Yep.
And the way out of it is to continue to don't get tired of the vaccine. Just do, it's part of the things, you have to get your teeth checked. Check. You got to get your hair done. Check. You got to get your car maintenance. Check. Did you get your COVID shots? Check. Like it has to be a part of your life routine. And I don't know, we got to get it together as a science community, as a healthcare community, as a clinical community to do this better and stop going down the acute route. And think about the foundational pieces that need to be built so that we don't, even if we get the next plague, it doesn't wipe us out like this one did.
Yeah. I love that call to really think about our systems. I think that that's exactly where we need to be spending energy. How do we improve our systems going forward?
Absolutely.
I agree. I also think, one of the things, I have a good friend who wrote, she's a sociologist, she wrote a book called Calling the Shots, and she interviewed a bunch of families that don't vaccinate. And she was trying to figure out what was part of the puzzle as to why that doesn't happen. And one thing that I think is interesting that would go towards the foundation, and I'm sure that you guys both do this in your practices, is you want to empower your patients and work with them to make the right decisions for them and their family. And that's something that I think has shifted a lot. Like you work with your patients and you tell them all these different things, like here's this and here's the side effect of this and here's this, and I'm going to work with you so that you can make the right decision for you and your family. And what she found was that with those same patients, she said, well, we like to make our own decisions because you tell us what you think and then we make the decision. So if you're empowering me to make the decision and I don't want to get vaccinated and I don't want to vaccinate my kids, then I'm not going to. And you told me that was okay.
Right. Right. So it's paradoxical. Yeah.
Which, so it was interesting because her whole book, Calling the Shots, which I was like, wow, yes, we want them to be empowered. We want our patients and we want all the families out there to get the information, to make the decisions, to work with you. But then the problem is if they make the decision to not do that, then, where do we go from there?
I don't even see it so much as a problem. I see it as a challenge that I really...
I like that. It's even more positive.
Not even to be positive, but just because I think that, and I think about this from the perspective of historically marginalized communities, and things that happen to us daily, but things that have happened to us historically. It's like, we owe it to people to give them the information and let them understand what decisions they want to make and to continue to walk with them. It's the crux of what we've talked about for this time together. The three of us is like, how do we keep walking with you? If you've made one decision that might put you in harm's way. I mean, there are communities out there where children are going to get measles and are going to suffer and die and be maimed. Over the summer, we had polio raise its ugly head in New York City. Like, it's going to become real to you. And so if you're in one of these communities where a family is saying, well, I have the information, I don't want to vaccinate my kid, I think we owe it as a challenge to say, you know what, I'm here. I will ask you every time. I will check in with you. If anything changes or you have more questions, please come back. And I really know this to be true. If polio, let's say, were to take off the way that it did back in the 50s, 60s, and people were to see, wow, little Bobby, who I used to know, now is paralyzed. Like, he didn't get vaccinated, now he's paralyzed. Wow, okay. I might not want to vaccinate my kid, but let me ask the doctor again. Let me just double check. Right? It's like, I think that the realities of life bring us to questions. And how do we do it so that we remain allied and available to have these conversations, even if the first few times the answers are absolutely not, no. And I think the bigger question that Dr. Toni asked is, how do we do so in a way that doesn't burn us out? Because this is a lifelong journey and a lifelong thing that we'll do. And I'm so inspired that people like you are here doing the work, holding vaccine advocacy workshops, because I think that it takes a community to keep us inspired and involved and to keep us going.
Well, I love that. And I think that this is a great way to end this conversation that could go on for another few hours.
No.
But we are so grateful to have you, Dr. Safo, and all of your insights. And we are just so honored to have you come and help make it make sense, where we are dedicated to trying to make sure that all of the jargon and all of the words make sense to you and your family, those of you who are listening. Thank you so very much for joining us today. We're so excited and inspired. We're going to keep it going. We're going to keep this.
Yes,
thank you so much. That was amazing. I love it.
Thank you guys so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right.